3 days after Liang Mei pulled a dying stranger from a desert ravine, 100 armed riders thundered toward her village with rifles gleaming in the sunset. At their head rode the man she'd saved, the cowboy who'd pressed a turquoise ring into her palm and vanished into the Nevada wasteland. Now he was coming back, but not alone, and not in peace. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll discover why one act of mercy became the most dangerous choice a woman ever made on the frontier. Hit that like button and let's begin. The spring of 1874 brought heat to the Nevada territory that seemed to rise not from the sun, but from the earth itself, as if the desert were exhaling all the suffering it had swallowed over centuries. The land stretched in every direction like a canvas painted in shades of rust and gold, broken only by twisted mesquite trees that clawed toward the sky and sagebrush that whispered secrets to the wind. Liang Mei moved through this landscape with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to read the desert's language. At 23, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that her mother had taught her, back straight, eyes forward, hands always busy with purpose. Her faded blue tunic and cotton trousers were practical, worn but clean, and her long black braid hung heavy down her back, tied with a simple piece of red thread that had once belonged to her grandmother. She carried a woven basket over one arm and a small knife tucked into her belt. The basket was already half filled with wild herbs, yarrow for fever, sage for infections, dried stems of rabbit brush that could ease stomach pains. These plants were her responsibility, her contribution to the small Chinese settlement that clung to existence 15 miles southeast of Iron Ridge. The settlement had no official name. On the crude territorial maps that occasionally made their way through the region, it appeared only as a cluster of vague marks, if it appeared at all. The 57 souls who lived there simply called it the village, though it was barely more than a collection of rough wooden structures and canvas tents arranged around a central well that produced water that tasted of minerals and survival. Mei's people had come to Nevada during the construction of the railroad, part of the great wave of Chinese laborers who'd laid track across impossible terrain for wages that barely kept them alive. When the railroad pushed onward and the companies no longer needed them, most had scattered, some returning to California, others disappearing into mining camps or taking whatever work they could find. Her father had been one of those who stayed, settling in this harsh valley because the land was empty and no one seemed to care if a handful of Chinese families tried to scratch out an existence from soil that white settlers had deemed worthless. He died 3 years ago when a wagon wheel crushed his leg and an infection had followed, swift and merciless. Her mother had passed the winter after, her body simply giving up as if she'd decided there was no point continuing without her husband of 30 years. Now Mei lived with her Uncle Chen and his wife, in a small house built from weathered planks and optimism. She helped tend their small vegetable garden, mended clothes, and gathered herbs that could be traded in Iron Ridge for flour, salt, and occasionally a few precious coins. The sun climbed higher as she worked her way along the edge of a dry wash, her eyes scanning the ground for the silvery green leaves of desert sage. The silence was immense, broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead and the rustle of her footsteps through brittle grass. She found a good patch of sage growing in the shade of a boulder and knelt to harvest it carefully, taking only what she needed and leaving the roots intact so the plants would return. Her mother had taught her this: to take from the earth with respect, to never be greedy, to remember that survival was a dance between need and preservation. The work was meditative, almost peaceful. Her hands moved with practiced precision, cutting, sorting, placing stems in her basket. The heat pressed down on her shoulders like a physical weight, but she'd learned long ago to work in rhythm with it rather than fight against it. She was reaching for another cluster of sage when the sound reached her. At first it was barely noticeable, a strange disturbance in the pattern of the desert's breathing. Mei paused, her hand hovering over the plant, her head tilting slightly as she listened. Then it came again, louder. A shout, desperate and raw. "Help! Someone! Anyone!" The voice was distant but carried clearly across the empty land, bouncing off the rocks and echoing through the ravines. Male, young, terrified. Mei stood quickly, her basket forgotten at her feet. The shout had come from somewhere to the west, beyond a low ridge covered with scrub brush. Her first instinct was caution, A woman alone on the frontier learned quickly that unknown voices could mean danger, but the desperation in that cry was unmistakable. "Please, I'm trapped!" She grabbed her basket and started moving toward the ridge, her pace quickening with each step. As she crested the rise, the landscape opened up before her, a network of dry ravines cutting through the desert floor like wounds in weathered skin. "Down here! For the love of someone, help me!" The voice was much closer now, and May could hear the edge of panic sharpening each word. She ran along the rim of the largest ravine, her eyes scanning the depths below. Then she saw him. At the bottom of the ravine, perhaps 20 feet down, a man was trapped in what the desert people called death mud, a treacherous mixture of clay, sand, and water that lurked in certain low-lying areas. It looked solid enough on the surface, but the moment weight pressed down on it, it became a hungry mouth that pulled and sucked and held on with terrible strength. The man was in up to his waist and sinking. He was young, probably no more than 25, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that stuck to his forehead with sweat and desperation. His shirt was torn, his face streaked with dirt and blood from what looked like a fall. His horse lay a few yards away, clearly dead, its neck bent at an unnatural angle. When he saw May appear at the rim of the ravine, his blue eyes widened with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You, please, I've been here for hours. I can't get out." May assessed the situation quickly. The ravine walls were too steep and crumbling to climb down safely. The mud already had him firmly in its grip, and every movement he made seemed to pull him deeper. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the way his breathing came in ragged gasps. She didn't speak, partly because her English was limited and heavily accented, partly because there was no time for words. Instead, she dropped her basket and ran back toward the place where she'd been gathering herbs. Coiled near the boulder where she'd left it was the rope she always carried, thin but strong, made of twisted hemp that her uncle had purchased from a trader. It was meant for tying bundles or helping pull stubborn roots from the ground, but today it would serve a different purpose. She grabbed the rope and sprinted back to the ravine. The man had sunk another inch or two. The mud was now up to his chest, and his struggles were becoming weaker, more defeated. His eyes tracked her movements with desperate intensity as she approached the edge. May looked around frantically for an anchor point. There, a mesquite tree, its roots twisted deep into the hard ground, standing about 10 feet from the ravine's edge. It wasn't large, but it had the weathered toughness of something that had survived decades in this brutal landscape. She wrapped one end of the rope around the mesquite trunk, testing it with her full weight. It held. "I'm throwing the rope," she called down to him, her accent thick but the words clear enough. "You catch it. You hold tight." He nodded, his face showing the first flicker of real hope. May coiled the free end of the rope and threw it toward him. The first attempt fell short. She pulled it back up, arm muscles burning, and threw again. This time it landed within reach, and the man grabbed it with hands that shook from exhaustion and fear. "Wrap it around your chest," May instructed, gesturing to demonstrate. "Under your arms, tight." He did as she directed, though the effort clearly cost him. The mud resisted his every movement, sucking at his body with obscene persistence. When he had the rope secured around his torso, he looked up at her. "I don't think this is going to work. The mud, it's got me too good." "We try," May said simply. She braced herself against the mesquite tree, wrapping the rope around her hands, despite knowing it would tear her skin. The hemp bit into her palms immediately, rough and unforgiving. "On 3, she called down. "You push with your legs. Push hard as you can. I pull. Understand?" "Understood." 1, 2, 3. May pulled with everything she had, every ounce of strength built from years of hauling water, digging gardens, and surviving in a place that demanded toughness from everyone who dared to live there. Her feet dug into the desert floor. Her back screamed in protest. Her hands felt like they were being flayed open. Below, the man pushed against the mud, his face contorting with effort. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, impossibly slowly, he began to move. The mud released him an inch at a time, making obscene sucking sounds that echoed through the ravine. May's vision started to blur from the effort, her breath coming in harsh gasps that burned her throat. "It's working," the man shouted. "Don't stop. Keep pulling." She pulled harder, her entire body trembling with the strain. The rope cut deeper into her hands, and she felt warm blood beginning to flow,
making the hemp slick and even more difficult to grip. But she didn't stop.
The man was free to his waist now, then his thighs, then his knees. With a final tremendous heave, he came completely free of the mud with a wet, sucking sound that seemed to express the desert's reluctance to give up its prey. He collapsed on slightly firmer ground at the bottom of the ravine, chest heaving, covered head to toe in gray-brown slime. May's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the rope. She looked down at her palms and saw raw, bleeding flesh where the hemp had torn through skin. But the man was free. That was all that mattered. "There's a shallow place," she called down to him, pointing to a section where the ravine wall had partially collapsed, creating a rough slope. "You can climb there." It took him nearly 15 minutes to make his way up. He was weak from his ordeal, his legs shaking, his breath coming in ragged pulls. May had to reach down and help pull him the final few feet, her wounded hands protesting with sharp, bright pain. When he finally stood on level ground beside her, they both simply stood there for a moment, breathing, trying to process what had just happened. The man looked down at the mud that had nearly killed him, then at the dead horse lying motionless in the ravine. Something dark and haunted flickered across his face. "I thought I was done," he said quietly. "I really thought that was it." May didn't respond. She was looking at her hands, watching blood drip slowly from her torn palms onto the thirsty desert floor. The man noticed, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "Your hands, my God, I did that to you." "Is okay," May said, though her accent made the words sound strange. "You are alive, that is what matters." He shook his head slowly, something like wonder in his eyes as he looked at her. "You saved my life. A complete stranger, and you saved my life." She shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gratitude. "Anyone would do the same." "No," he said firmly, "they wouldn't. Especially not—" He trailed off, but May understood what he'd stopped himself from saying. "Especially not for someone like me. Especially not a Chinese woman helping a white man in a territory where such lines were rarely crossed except in violence or exploitation." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. When he opened his mud-caked hand, May saw a ring, silver band with a piece of turquoise set into it, the stone the color of winter sky. "This was my mother's," he said. "Only thing I've got of value on me. I want you to have it. It's not enough. Nothing could be enough for what you just did. But please, take it." May started to shake her head, to refuse, but something in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't about payment or obligation. It was about something deeper, a gesture of connection in a disconnected land, a token of genuine gratitude in a place where most interactions were transactional at best. She held out her bloodied palm, and he placed the ring in it gently, careful not to press against her wounds. "Thank you," he said simply. "I won't forget this. Or you." May closed her fingers around the ring, feeling the cool weight of the silver and stone against her damaged skin. "What is your name?" she asked. "Cole," he said. "Cole Whitaker." "I am May." "May," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you, May." He glanced back at the ravine one more time, his jaw tightening. "I need to get back to town. Need to find another horse, get word to people who'll be wondering where I am." May nodded. Iron Ridge was about 8 miles to the northwest, a hard walk for someone in his condition, but survivable. "You can make it to the settlement," she offered, pointing southeast. "My village. We have water. You can rest." Something flickered in his expression. Hesitation, maybe, or calculation. But then he shook his head. "That's kind of you, but I need to get back. People will be looking for me." He met her eyes. "But I mean it. I won't forget this. What you did today." And then, before she could respond, he turned and started walking northwest, his gait unsteady but determined. May watched him go until he disappeared behind a ridge of broken rocks and scrub brush. Then she looked down at the turquoise ring in her palm, its stone catching the afternoon light. A small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning, that accepting gifts from strangers could be dangerous, that involvement with white settlers rarely ended well for people like her. But she pushed the voice away. The man had been dying. She had saved him. He had given her his mother's ring in gratitude. It was a simple transaction of human kindness in an unkind land, or so she believed. May tucked the ring carefully into the small leather pouch she wore on a cord around her neck, the same pouch where she kept the red thread from her grandmother's hair and a tiny jade carving her father had given her on her 10th birthday. She retrieved her basket of herbs, now scattered and dusty from being dropped, and began the long walk back to the village. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and blood. The temperature would drop soon. The desert always turned cold at night, as if to balance the scorching heat of day. Her hands throbbed with every step, and she knew she would need to clean and bind them properly when she got home. The wounds were deep enough that they might leave scars, permanent reminders of this strange afternoon. But she had saved a man's life. In the harsh calculus of frontier existence, where death was cheap and kindness expensive, that felt like something worth remembering. As May walked, she had no way of knowing that this simple act of mercy would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter everything she knew. She couldn't see the future bearing down on her like a storm gathering on a distant horizon. All she knew was the weight of the turquoise ring against her chest, the pain in her hands, and the satisfaction of having acted according to the principles her parents had taught her. Help those in need. Show kindness to strangers. Do what is right, regardless of the cost. These were the beliefs she carried with her as she made her way home through the lengthening shadows. These were the beliefs that would soon be tested in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The village appeared as she crested the final ridge, a small cluster of structures that looked almost beautiful in the golden light of late afternoon. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and she could see figures moving between the buildings, going about the ordinary business of survival. It looked peaceful. It looked safe. It looked like home. May didn't know that in 3 days this entire landscape would be transformed into something she didn't recognize. She didn't know that the simple act of throwing a rope to a drowning stranger would become the pivot point on which her entire world would turn. She didn't know that mercy could be the most dangerous weapon of all. She simply walked home through the cooling desert, her wounded hands cradled against her chest, the turquoise ring a secret weight against her heart. Behind her, the sun continued its descent, and the shadows grew longer. Somewhere in the distance, Cole Whitaker was making his way toward Iron Ridge, carrying with him memories of the Chinese woman who had saved his life and the promise that he wouldn't forget her. In the desert, promises are like water, precious and unreliable, capable of sustaining life or vanishing without warning when you need them most. But May didn't know that yet. Not yet. The evening air had turned cool by the time May reached the village well, where her Aunt Lynn was drawing water for the evening meal. The older woman looked up as May approached, her weathered face immediately registering concern when she saw the blood-stained cloth May had wrapped around her hands. "What happened to you?" Lynn set down her bucket and hurried over, reaching for May's wrists. "These wounds are deep. How did this happen?" "I helped someone," May said quietly. "A man trapped in the mudflats near Devil's Ravine. He would have died if I hadn't pulled him out." Lynn's expression shifted from concern to something harder. "A man? What kind of man travels alone through the desert and ends up in the mudflats?" "He had a horse. It fell and died. He was just unlucky." "Unlucky," Lynn repeated, her tone suggesting she didn't believe in such simple explanations. She turned May's hands over carefully, examining the rope burns and torn skin. "Come, these need proper cleaning before infection sets in." Inside the small house, Uncle Chen sat at the rough wooden table, mending a harness by lamplight. He was a compact man in his 50s with gray threading through his black hair and eyes that had learned to see trouble before it arrived. He glanced up as they entered, his gaze immediately finding May's bandaged hands. "What trouble has found you?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had survived by anticipating danger. While Lynn heated water and prepared clean cloth, May told them the full story. The desperate cries, the man trapped in the mud, the rope, and the mesquite tree, the terrible effort of pulling him free. She showed them the turquoise ring, still crusted with dried blood from her palms. Chen studied the ring for a long moment, turning it over in his fingers. The silver caught the lamplight, and the turquoise stone seemed to glow with an inner fire. "This is not a poor man's ring," he said finally. "The silver is good quality. The turquoise is real and well cut. This belonged to someone with money." He said it was his mother's, May explained. He wanted me to have it as thanks for saving his life. And his name? Chen asked. Cole Whitaker. Something flickered across Chen's face, recognition perhaps, or worry. He set the ring down on the table as if it had suddenly become hot to the touch. You know this name? Lynn asked, catching the same change in her husband's expression that May had noticed. I have heard it, Chen said carefully. In Iron Ridge, when I went to trade last month. Whitaker is a name that carries weight in this territory. They own land. They have influence with the territorial government. They have men who work for them. He was just a young man, May said, alone and frightened. He wasn't acting like someone with power. A drowning man is still just a man, Chen agreed. But when he stands on dry ground again, he remembers who he is and who you are. The words settled over the room like dust, heavy and unavoidable. Lynn began cleaning May's wounds, her touch gentle but her face troubled. The water stung, and May had to bite her lip to keep from crying out as her aunt worked bits of hemp fiber and dried blood from the torn flesh. You did a kind thing, Lynn said quietly. But kindness and wisdom are not always the same. In this territory, lines exist that we do not cross. Not because we are cruel, but because crossing them brings attention, and attention brings danger. I couldn't just let him die, May protested. No, Chen said, his voice softer now. You could not. That is who you are, and who your parents raised you to be. But your aunt is right to worry. We live here only because we stay invisible. We take the land no one wants. We trade in goods no one else values. We make ourselves small and quiet and forgettable. A Chinese woman saving the life of a white landowner, that is not invisible. That is a story people will tell. He said he wouldn't forget me, May said, though even as she spoke the words, she heard how naive they sounded. Chen smiled sadly. I'm sure he won't. The question is what he will do with that memory. Lynn finished wrapping May's hands in clean cloth and sat back. What's done is done. The man is saved, the ring is given. Now we wait and see if ripples come from this stone you've thrown. They ate their evening meal in relative silence. Rice with preserved vegetables and a small portion of salted fish that Chen had traded for the previous week. The food was simple but prepared with care, and May found herself grateful for the familiar rituals of family and home. After dinner, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The desert sky was spectacular, scattered with more stars than seemed possible, each one sharp and bright in the clear air. She could see the dim shapes of other houses, lamplight glowing through oiled paper windows, smoke rising from chimneys into the darkness. This was her world. Small and precarious, yes, but it was hers. These people were her people. Whatever Chen and Lin's worries, surely one act of kindness couldn't threaten all of this. The next day passed quietly. May helped in the garden, weeded between the rows of struggling vegetables, and tried not to think too much about the man she'd saved or the ring that now hung around her neck beneath her tunic. Her hands ached as she worked, the bandages quickly becoming stained with dirt and sweat, but the pain was manageable. It was late afternoon when young Wei came running through the village, his face flushed with excitement. "Riders!" he shouted, "coming from Iron Ridge!" The village transformed immediately. People emerged from houses and workshops, faces tight with apprehension. Riders from town rarely brought good news. Usually they came to make demands, for labor, for payment of some invented debt, or simply to remind the Chinese settlers that they existed on sufferance and could be removed at any moment. But when the two riders appeared on the ridge, they didn't approach the village. They simply sat on their horses, silhouetted against the late afternoon sky, and watched. After perhaps 10 minutes, they turned and rode back the way they'd come. What were they doing? May asked her uncle, who stood beside her with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Counting, Chen said quietly. Seeing how many of us there are. Looking at our defenses like... We don't have defenses, May pointed out. Exactly. That night, Elder Wang called a meeting in the largest building, a structure that served as both community gathering place and storage for tools and supplies. Nearly everyone in the village crowded inside, their faces lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Wang was 73, the oldest among them, a man who had survived the worst years of the railroad construction and carried the scars to prove it. He stood at the front of the room, his back straight despite his age, and waited for the murmuring to die down. "We all saw the riders today," he began, his voice still strong despite his years. "This is the third time in 2 weeks that men from Iron Ridge have come to watch us. They are not coming to trade. They are not coming to ask for help. They are coming to study us like a hunter studies prey." "Maybe they're just curious," someone suggested from the back. "Men with rifles are never just curious," Wong replied. "I have lived long enough to recognize the signs. Something is building. I do not know what, but I can feel it the way you feel a storm before it arrives." "What can we do?" asked Widow Tan, who had lost her husband to a mining accident 5 years earlier. "We have no weapons beyond tools. We have no legal claim to this land. If they decide to move against us, what defense do we have?" The room fell silent because everyone knew the answer. None. They had no defense. "We could leave," someone suggested. "Pack up and move further into the desert, find another place." "To where?" Chen asked, his voice cutting through the discussion. "Every piece of good land in this territory belongs to someone. Every water source is claimed. We settled here because it was the only place no one else wanted. If we move, we start over with even less than we have now. Then we stay and hope they leave us alone," another voice said. "Hope is not a strategy," Wong replied, "but it may be all we have. I suggest we continue as we always have, quietly, carefully, giving no one reason to notice us or take offense. We work, we trade, we keep to ourselves. We make ourselves invisible again." May felt the weight of the turquoise ring against her chest and said nothing. The meeting dispersed slowly, people drifting back to their homes in small clusters, their voices low and worried. May walked back with her aunt and uncle, the cool night air carrying the scent of sage and distant rain that would probably never arrive. "Do you think Elder Wong is right?" May asked. "That something bad is coming?" Chen looked up at the stars for a long moment before answering. "Wong has survived by trusting his instincts. When a man like that says he feels a storm building, I listen." That night, May lay on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, sleep eluding her despite her exhaustion. Through the thin walls, she could hear her aunt and uncle talking in low voices, their words indistinct but their tone worried. She pulled the turquoise ring from beneath her tunic and held it up in the dim moonlight that filtered through the window. The stone seemed to capture the light and hold it, glowing softly in her palm. Had she made a terrible mistake? Had this simple act of saving a life somehow set in motion forces she didn't understand? But how could saving someone be wrong? How could showing mercy and kindness be a mistake? She tucked the ring back against her skin and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come. The second day after the rescue dawned bright and hot, the sun hammering down on the desert with renewed fury. May worked in the garden again, her healing hands making the labor difficult but not impossible. Around her, the village went about its business with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. Chen had gone into Iron Ridge to trade herbs and vegetables for flour and salt. He returned in the late afternoon, his face grim. "There is talk in town," he told May and Lin as they prepared the evening meal. "About the Whitaker family. Apparently their youngest son disappeared 3 days ago. Went out riding and never came back. They found his dead horse in a ravine, but no sign of him. The family feared the worst." May's hand stilled on the knife she was using to cut vegetables. "Until yesterday," Chen continued, "when the son showed up, alive and well. He told a story about being trapped in mud and rescued by a Chinese woman. A woman he didn't know, who risked her own safety to save him." "What are people saying about this?" Lin asked carefully. Chen's expression darkened. "Some are saying it's a remarkable story of kindness across boundaries. Others are saying it doesn't matter what the story is. What matters is that the Whitakers now have an excuse to pay attention to us. And the Whitakers paying attention is never good for anyone." "I didn't ask for their attention," May said quietly. "I just helped someone who needed help." "I know," Chen said, and his voice was kind. "But intent and consequence rarely align in this world." That evening, more riders appeared on the ridge. This time, there were 5 of them, and they stayed longer, pointing at various buildings, seeming to discuss what they saw. One of them had a piece of paper and appeared to be making notes or sketches. The village watched them in tense silence until they finally rode away as the sun touched the western horizon.
They're planning something, Young Wei's father said, standing outside his workshop with his arms crossed. This isn't curiosity. This is preparation. The third morning brought a strange, heavy quality to the air. The desert seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to break. May woke early, her sleep having been troubled by dreams she couldn't quite remember, leaving only a residue of unease. She unwrapped her hands to inspect the wounds. They were healing well. Her aunt's careful tending had prevented infection, and already new skin was beginning to form over the worst of the damage. In a week, maybe 2, they would be fully healed. If she had a week. The thought came unbidden, and she tried to push it away, but it lingered like smoke. She was helping Lynn prepare breakfast when they heard the sound, a low rumble, like distant thunder, except the sky was perfectly clear. Chen stepped outside, and May followed. Other villagers were emerging from their homes, all of them turning toward the west, toward the sound that was growing steadily louder. "What is that?" someone asked. Elder Wang appeared, his face grave. "Horses," he said. "Many horses." The rumble grew into thunder, and then into something that shook the earth itself. A massive cloud of dust rose from the western ridge, boiling into the clear morning air like smoke from a fire. And then they appeared, riders cresting the ridge in a line that seemed to stretch forever. The morning sun caught on rifle barrels and brass buttons on belt buckles and spurs. They came in formation, organized and deliberate, a display of power that was impossible to misunderstand. May's breath caught in her chest as she began to count. 10 riders, 20, 30. The line kept coming. 50, 70. "Mother of mercy," Lynn whispered beside her. By the time the last rider appeared on the ridge, May had stopped counting. There had to be at least 100 of them, maybe more. They sat on their horses in perfect stillness, backlit by the rising sun, an army assembled for a purpose that couldn't possibly be peaceful. And at their head, on a large black horse, sat a figure May recognized even at this distance. Cole Whitaker. But he was transformed. Gone was the desperate, frightened man covered in mud and gratitude. In his place was someone who sat tall in the saddle, dressed in clean clothes, a rifle resting across his lap. Even from this distance, May could see the change in his bearing, the confidence of someone who commanded rather than begged. "This can't be happening," May breathed. But it was. The riders began to move down from the ridge, their formation tightening as they approached. The thunder of their hooves filled the air, drowning out every other sound. Dust billowed around them like a living thing. The village erupted into chaos. People ran for their homes, grabbing children, shouting warnings. Some men grabbed tools, hammers, shovels, anything that could serve as a weapon, though everyone knew such implements would be useless against mounted men with rifles. Elder Wang stood in the center of the village, his arms raised. "Stay calm," he shouted, though his own voice shook. "Do not provoke them. Stay calm." But calm was impossible as the wall of riders descended on the village. May stood frozen, watching Cole Whitaker lead his army toward them. Her hand went instinctively to the turquoise ring beneath her tunic, clutching it as if it were some kind of talisman that could protect against what was coming. She had saved his life. She had pulled him from certain death. She had given him mercy when he had nothing and no one. And now he was coming back. But not to thank her, not to repay the debt. He was coming with 100 armed men at his back, and the intent written in that formation was clear to anyone with eyes to see. Chen appeared beside her, his face drained of color. "Get inside," he said urgently. "Now! Whatever happens, stay inside." "Uncle, I don't understand. Why would he—" "Inside!" Chen's voice cracked like a whip, and May stumbled backward. But she didn't go inside. She couldn't. She stood and watched as Cole Whitaker and his 100 riders thundered into the village, their horses churning up dust that turned the morning air brown and choking. The sound was overwhelming, hooves on hard earth, the jangle of tack and spurs, the creak of leather and wood. The riders spread out, surrounding the entire village in a loose circle. Their rifles were drawn but not yet aimed, a threat held in reserve but impossible to ignore. And then Cole Whitaker rode into the center of the village and brought his black horse to a halt. For a long moment, he simply sat there, looking around at the frightened faces, the rough buildings, the evidence of lives lived on the edge of survival. His expression was hard to read, not quite cruel, but certainly not kind. Something complicated flickered behind his eyes. Then his gaze found May.
Their eyes met across the dusty space, and May saw recognition there. Yes, he remembered her.
He knew exactly who she was and what she had done for him. The question was, did it matter? May's hand tightened around the turquoise ring, and she took a single step forward, emerging from the shadow of her uncle's house into the harsh morning light. She had saved this man's life. Now she was about to discover what that mercy was worth. The answer, she suspected, was about to reshape everything she thought she understood about kindness, debt, and the brutal mathematics of power in a lawless land where some lives were valued and others were not. Cole Whitaker's eyes held hers for 3 heartbeats before he looked away, scanning the frightened faces of the villagers who had begun to emerge from their homes despite their terror. His jaw was set in a hard line, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried across the dusty square with an authority that made May's chest tighten. "I'm looking for the woman who calls herself May," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The one who pulled me from the mudflats 3 days ago." May felt every eye in the village turn toward her. Chen grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "Don't," he hissed. "Stay silent. Let him search. Don't give yourself up." But May pulled her arm free and took another step forward, her wounded hands clenched at her sides. "I am May," she said, her accent thick but her voice steady. "I helped you when you were dying. I remember you, Cole Whitaker." A murmur rippled through the mounted men, some of them exchanging glances, others leaning forward in their saddles to get a better look at the small Chinese woman who had dared to speak. Cole dismounted with fluid grace, handing his reins to one of the nearby riders. He walked toward May slowly, his boots raising small puffs of dust with each step. As he approached, May could see the details she'd missed at a distance. The expensive cut of his clothes, the quality of his leather gun belt, the silver watch chain glinting at his vest. This was not the mud-covered stranger she had rescued. This was someone who belonged to a different world entirely. He stopped about 6 feet away from her, close enough to speak without shouting but maintaining a careful distance. "You did save me," he said, and there was something strange in his voice, acknowledgement mixed with something else May couldn't quite identify. "I told my family about you, about what you did." "Then why do you come here with so many men?" May asked. "Why do you bring guns to people who mean you no harm?" Cole's expression flickered, and for just a moment May saw something that might have been regret or shame, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a mask of hard pragmatism. "I didn't come here for you," he said quietly, though his words seemed designed to carry to the watching riders. "I came because my father sent me, because my older brother Marcus insisted, because there are things happening in this territory that are bigger than one woman pulling one man from the mud." "What things?" Elder Wong's voice cut through the tension as the old man stepped forward, his spine straight despite his years. "We are simple people living on land no one else wants. What threat do we pose to anyone?" Cole turned to face Wong, and May saw his jaw tighten again. "It's not about threat. It's about order. The territorial governor is pushing for organization, property claims, tax rolls, legal recognition of settlements. My father has considerable influence with the territorial authorities, and he's been asked to help establish proper boundaries and claims throughout this region." "We have no property claims," Wong said carefully. "We simply live here." "Exactly," Cole replied. "Which means legally, you don't exist, and land that belongs to no one can be claimed by someone else." The implications hung in the air like gun smoke. Chen moved to stand beside May, his voice hard when he spoke. "So you come to drive us off? To take land that has no value except that we have made it livable through years of work?" "I come," Cole said, and now his voice carried an edge of frustration, "because I was ordered to come. Because my father—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "This doesn't have to be violent. If you leave peacefully, find somewhere else to settle, no one needs to get hurt." "Leave to where?" Widow Tan's voice rose from the gathered crowd, sharp with anger and desperation. "We have nothing but what stands here. Our homes, our gardens, the well we dug with our own hands. You want us to walk away from all of that because your father says so?" Cole's hand moved unconsciously to his gun belt, not threatening but seeking comfort from something familiar. "I'm trying to give you options. My brother Marcus wanted me to come with even more men. He wanted me to burn you out without warning, to make an example. I convinced him to let me try talking first. Talking, May repeated, and she couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. This is talking? 100 armed men surrounding frightened families is how you talk? Cole's eyes snapped back to her, and this time she saw real emotion there. Guilt, anger, something that looked almost like pain. You don't understand the situation, he said, his voice dropping lower, meant more for her than for the crowd. My family, we're not simple ranchers. We control thousands of acres. We have contracts with the territorial government, with railroad companies, with investors back east. When the governor says he wants this region organized and claimed properly, he means he wants it in the hands of people who can develop it, who can turn it profitable. Profitable, Wong said, and the word sounded like a curse in his mouth. And we are not profitable. We are simply alive, which apparently is no longer enough. One of the mounted riders, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and cold eyes, urged his horse forward. We're wasting time, Cole. Your father said to clear them out by noon. It's already past 9. Cole shot the man a sharp look. I'm handling this, Patterson. You're talking to them like they have choices, Patterson replied. They don't. Either they leave or we make them leave. Those were the orders. May saw Cole's hands curl into fists at his sides. The tension between him and the rider called Patterson was palpable, a struggle for authority that went beyond this particular moment. I give the orders here, Cole said, his voice carrying a warning edge. My father put me in charge of this operation, not you. Patterson's smile was cold. Your father put you in charge because your brother's methods would have made the territorial governor uncomfortable. But we all know what the end result needs to be. These people need to be gone. Whether you do it with words or we do it with action doesn't matter much in the long run. The words settled over the village like a death sentence. Women pulled children closer. Men gripped their useless tools tighter. Elder Wong's face had gone gray. May felt something break open inside her chest. A mixture of fury and betrayal so intense it made her dizzy. She pulled the turquoise ring from beneath her tunic, the cord snapping as she yanked it free. She held it up, the stone catching the morning light. You gave me this, she said to Cole, her voice shaking with emotion. You said you would never forget what I did. You said it meant something. Cole stared at the ring, and for a moment his carefully maintained composure cracked completely. His face showed naked conflict, shame wrestling with duty, personal debt fighting against family obligation. It did mean something, he said quietly. It does. But what? May took a step closer, holding the ring out like an accusation. But your family's land claims are more important than a human life? But power and profit matter more than honor? You don't understand how things work here, Cole said, and there was genuine anguish in his voice now. I have obligations, family expectations. If I refuse this, if I show weakness, Marcus will take over and it will be worse. So much worse. Weakness, May repeated. She looked at the ring in her palm one more time, then threw it at his feet. It landed in the dust between them, the turquoise stone now coated in brown grit. Keeping your word is not weakness. Showing mercy is not weakness. But coming here with an army to drive out families who have done nothing wrong, that is not strength. That is cowardice dressed in power. Patterson laughed, a harsh bark of sound. Listen to this one. Got a mouth on her. Maybe we should teach her some manners about speaking to her betters. Cole whirled on him, his hand dropping to his revolver. Touch her, and I'll put a bullet in you myself. The threat hung in the air, and May saw several of the other riders shift uneasily in their saddles. Patterson's smile faded, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. Interesting, he said softly. Seems like the stories were true. The little Chinese girl saved your life, and now you've gone soft for her. Your father's going to be real disappointed when I tell him how this went. Tell him whatever you want, Cole snapped. But while I'm in charge here, you follow my orders, and I say no one touches anyone unless I give the word. Another rider, younger than Patterson but with similar hard eyes, spoke up. Your father's patience isn't infinite, Cole. He sent us here to do a job. Marcus is already questioning whether you're fit to handle family business. You really want to prove him right by protecting these people? May watched Cole's face as he processed this, saw the war being fought behind his eyes. He was trapped, she realized, caught between the debt he felt he owed her and the expectations of his family. between the person he might want to be and the person his world demanded he become. Chen's voice cut through the tension, calm and measured. You say we must leave. Give us 3 days to gather our belongings, to prepare. We will go peacefully, cause no trouble. 3 days is not so much to ask. Patterson shook his head. No extensions. You leave today, now, or 2 days, Cole interrupted, his voice sharp with decision. You have 2 days to pack what you can carry and clear out. After that, this land becomes Whitaker property, and anyone still here will be treated as trespassing. Cole, your father said, Patterson began. My father put me in charge, Cole cut him off. 2 days. That's my decision. He turned back to May, and the look he gave her was complicated. Apology and resignation mixed with something that might have been regret for roads not taken, choices not made. I'm sorry, he said, so quietly that only she could hear. For what it's worth, I am genuinely sorry. You saved my life, and I owe you a debt I can never repay. But some debts can't be honored, not in the world we actually live in. May met his eyes and saw the truth there. He meant it. The apology was real, but it changed nothing. A debt that cannot be honored is just another betrayal, she said. Pretty words do not make it less so. Cole bent and retrieved the turquoise ring from the dust, brushing it clean with careful fingers. He held it out to her. Keep it, May said coldly. I do not want gifts from men without honor. He flinched as if she'd struck him, but he pocketed the ring without further argument. Then he turned to address the entire village, his voice resuming the authoritative tone of someone issuing orders. You have 2 days to gather your possessions and vacate this land. Any structures left standing will be burned. Any livestock left behind will be claimed as property of the Whitaker family. If you're still here when we return, you'll be removed by force. Those are the terms. They're not negotiable. Elder Wong stepped forward again, his voice carrying the weight of all his years. Young man, you stand here with weapons and numbers and tell us what is not negotiable. But let me tell you what is also not negotiable. The bonds of human decency, the obligation to show mercy to those weaker than yourself, the debt a man owes to someone who saved his life. You speak of what you must do because of family and power and territory, but I ask you to consider what kind of man you will become if you do this thing. Some choices change us forever, and there is no going back from them. For just a moment, Wong's words seemed to reach something in Cole. His expression softened, and his hand moved unconsciously toward his pocket where he'd placed the turquoise ring. But then Patterson spoke again, his voice dripping with contempt. Old man, you don't give lectures to your betters. The Whitakers have been building this territory since before you people showed up looking for scraps. You've got 2 days to disappear, and you should be grateful for that much mercy. Mercy, Wong repeated, and smiled without humor. Yes, we should be grateful for mercy. 2 days to abandon our homes instead of being driven out immediately. Such generosity. Cole's face hardened again, the moment of potential weakness passing. 2 days, he repeated firmly. Starting now. He turned and walked back to his horse, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. The other riders began to pull back, forming up into their original formation. But they didn't leave entirely. Instead, they spread out in a loose perimeter around the village, making it clear they would be watching, waiting, ensuring compliance. May stood in the center of the village square, her bandaged hands trembling at her sides, watching Cole Whitaker ride to a position on the eastern ridge. He sat there on his black horse, silhouetted against the morning sky, a figure of power and authority who owed his life to a woman he was now dispossessing. The villagers began to gather around Elder Wong, voices rising in confusion and fear. What do we do? Where can we go? We can't just leave everything we've built. We have no choice, Wong said, his voice heavy with defeat. We pack what we can carry. We leave what we cannot. We go somewhere else and start over, as we have done before, as we may have to do again. This is not right, Widow Tan said, tears streaming down her weathered face. We have done nothing wrong. We hurt no one. We claim nothing that belonged to others. How can this be happening? Chen put his arm around his wife, who had begun to weep quietly. Right and wrong matter little when power makes the decisions. We knew this land was borrowed time, we just didn't know how short that time would be. May felt numb, disconnected from the chaos around her. She looked down at her bandaged hands, at the rope burns and torn skin that were the physical evidence of her choice to save a man's life. The wounds would heal, eventually, but the lesson being taught here would leave different kinds of scars. Young Wei's mother approached May, her face a mixture of anger and accusation. "You brought this on us. You saved that man, and now look what has come of it. If you had just left him to die—" "Enough," Chen said sharply. May did what anyone with a conscience would do. She could not have known what would follow. "Couldn't she?" the woman shot back. "We all know the rules of this world. White men and Chinese women, those lines exist for reasons. Crossing them brings attention, and attention brings danger. Now we all pay the price for her kindness." May wanted to defend herself, to argue, to point out the injustice of being blamed for showing mercy. But the words died in her throat because part of her wondered if the woman was right. If she had just walked past that ravine, if she had ignored Cole Whitaker's desperate cries, would any of this be happening? Lynn appeared beside her, taking May's arm gently. "Come inside. We need to start deciding what we can carry and what we must leave behind." Inside the small house, the three of them stood in silence for a long moment, looking at the simple furnishings that had become home, the rough table Chen had built, the sleeping mats Lin had sewn, the few precious items that had survived the journey from China and the hard years since. "We can take the cooking pots," Lin said finally, her voice mechanical, stripped of emotion. "The tools, some clothes, food enough for a few days, everything else stays." "Where will we go?" May asked quietly. Chen shook his head. "I don't know. There are other Chinese settlements scattered through the territory. Some of them might take us in. Or we head west, try to make it back to California. Start over there." "Starting over," Lin said bitterly. "We have started over so many times." How many times can people start over before there is nothing left to build with? Outside, the sound of the village beginning to pack echoed through the thin walls. The creak of wagon wheels, the cry of children too young to understand what was happening, the low voices of people trying to make impossible decisions about what pieces of their lives they could carry and what they would have to leave behind. May moved to the window and looked out at the ridge where Cole Whitaker still sat on his black horse, watching. Even at this distance, she could feel his gaze, could sense the weight of his attention. He owed her his life, and he was repaying that debt by destroying hers. The mathematics of it were brutal and clear. In this world, in this place, some lives mattered more than others. Some people had the power to take, and others had only the ability to endure what was taken from them. She had believed, in the moment she threw that rope into the ravine, that kindness mattered, that saving a life created a bond, an obligation, something sacred that transcended the arbitrary divisions of race and power. She had been wrong, or perhaps the world had simply taught her that idealism was a luxury she could not afford. The sun climbed higher in the sky, measuring out the first hours of the 2 days they'd been granted. Around the village, families worked frantically to salvage what they could from lives that were being forcibly dismantled. Elder Wong moved from house to house, offering what comfort and counsel he could, his old face lined with a sadness that seemed to age him further with each passing hour. By midday, the first wagon was loaded and ready to depart. The Tan family, Widow Tan and her 2 teenage sons, had decided to head west immediately, hoping to make it to the next settlement before their supplies ran out. "Better to go now, while we have daylight," Widow Tan said, though her eyes were red from weeping. "Better to be gone from this cursed place." The whole village gathered to see them off, a silent crowd, watching as the wagon creaked into motion, carrying away everything the Tan family had managed to salvage from their home. As the wagon passed through the ring of watching riders, May saw Patterson smile, a cold, satisfied expression that made her stomach turn. This was just the beginning. Over the next day and a half, the village would be systematically dismantled, picked apart piece by piece as families made their desperate choices about what to save and what to abandon. And Cole Whitaker would watch it all from his position on the ridge, a silent witness to the destruction his mercy, 2 days instead of immediate violence, had made slightly less brutal but no less complete. May turned away from the window and began to help her aunt sort through their belongings, her wounded hands aching as she worked. She had saved a man's life, and in return, he had shown her exactly how little that meant in a world where power and property mattered more than honor,
where family loyalty trumped personal debt, where the lines drawn between people were enforced not by law or justice, but by whoever had the most guns and the fewest scruples about using them. The lesson was harsh and clear. Mercy, in the end, had been the most dangerous choice she could have made, and there was no taking it back. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as the village continued its forced dismantling. The sound of hammering and tearing filled the air as families salvaged what materials they could from their homes. Planks that might be used again, nails precious enough to straighten and save, pieces of canvas that could serve as shelter until something more permanent could be built. May worked alongside her aunt and uncle, moving through their small house with methodical determination. Each item they touched required a decision, and each decision felt like a small death. The table Chen had built from scavenged wood, too heavy to carry, must be left behind. The quilt Lin had sewn over 3 winters, stitched from scraps of fabric saved over years, rolled tight and tied with rope, it would come with them. The small shrine May's mother had maintained, with its carved wooden figures and incense holder, the figures would come. The holder was too fragile and would have to stay. "We need to be practical," Chen said, though his voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "Tools first, food second, clothes third. Everything else is luxury we cannot afford." Lin nodded, but May saw her aunt's hand linger on a small ceramic bowl, blue and white, that had come all the way from China with her family. It was chipped and cracked, worth nothing to anyone else, but May knew it had belonged to Lin's grandmother. "Take it," May said softly. "We can wrap it in cloth. It weighs almost nothing." Lin's eyes filled with tears. "It is foolish to carry such things when we need every inch of space for what keeps us alive." "We need more than food to stay alive," May replied. "We need to remember who we are." Lin carefully wrapped the bowl in a piece of old cotton and placed it in the basket with the other items they would carry. Outside, the sound of another wagon departing echoed through the village. The Zhou family this time, heading south toward a mining camp where they had distant relatives. Elder Wang stood watching them go, his face carved from stone, his eyes tracking the wagon until it disappeared from view. May stepped outside to rest her aching hands and found young Wei sitting on the ground near the well, his face streaked with tears. "My father says we have to leave the chickens," Wei said, his voice breaking. "All of them. He says we cannot carry them and they will slow us down. But I raised them from chicks. I know all their names." May sat down beside him, her heart aching for this boy who had never known anything but this small village, who had invested his childhood in birds that would now be abandoned or claimed by strangers. "Life is full of leaving things behind," she said gently. "But what we carry inside, the memories, the love we gave them, no one can take that from us." "It is not fair," Wei said fiercely. "We did nothing wrong. Why do they get to take everything from us?" May had no answer that would satisfy him because there was no satisfactory answer. The world was not fair, had never been fair, would likely never be fair. Power made its own rules, and those without power simply endured. From the eastern ridge, she could still see Cole Whitaker's silhouette, that silent witness to their suffering. As the afternoon wore on, she had watched other riders come and go, reporting to him, receiving instructions. The perimeter around the village remained constant, a ring of armed men ensuring that no one tried to stay, that the evacuation proceeded as ordered. Chen emerged from the house carrying their 2 chickens in a makeshift cage. He walked over to where several other villagers had gathered their livestock, chickens, 3 goats, 1 elderly mule, all the animals that had been part of their small economy, now corralled together and waiting. "What will happen to them?" someone asked. Chen's face was grim. "The Whitakers will claim them, or they will starve, or coyotes will get them." "Does it matter?" It did matter, May thought. Each loss mattered. The animals, the houses, the gardens they had coaxed from reluctant soil, the well they had dug through rock and clay to find water. Each piece of their lives that was being stripped away mattered, even if the men with guns thought otherwise. As evening approached, Elder Wang called another gathering. Nearly half the village had already departed, and those who remained looked exhausted and defeated, their faces showing the strain of impossible choices and backbreaking work. "We have until tomorrow at sunset," Wang said, his voice carrying across the diminished crowd. "Those of you who are not yet ready to leave must work through the night if necessary. Pack only what you can truly carry. The road ahead will be hard,
and every unnecessary pound will make it harder. "Where are we going?" asked Mr. Feng, whose pregnant wife sat beside him with one hand on her swollen belly. "Do we even know where we are heading?" "West," Wang said. "There is a settlement near Carson Valley, about 60 miles. They may take us in temporarily. From there we find our own paths. Some may continue to California. Others may head north. We scatter as we must to survive." "Scatter," Lin repeated bitterly. "We came together to be strong. Now we scatter to be invisible again." "Invisibility is a kind of survival," Wang replied. "It is not glorious, but it keeps us alive." That night, May could not sleep. She lay on her sleeping mat listening to the sounds of the village packing, the low voices of people making plans, the occasional cry of a child woken by the unusual activity. Through the thin walls, she could hear her aunt weeping quietly and her uncle's murmured attempts at comfort. Finally, she rose and stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, indifferent to human suffering, beautiful and distant. The fires of the watching riders dotted the perimeter like earthbound stars, a constellation of power and threat. She walked to the center of the village, to the well that had served them for 3 years. It was deep and had been hard to dig, requiring weeks of labor from every able-bodied person. The water it produced was clean and cold, a treasure in this dry land. Tomorrow it would belong to someone else. "Can't sleep either?" May turned to find Elder Wang approaching, his steps slow but steady. He carried himself like a man who had made peace with suffering, who had learned to carry sorrow without letting it break him. "I keep thinking about the rope," May said quietly, "the moment I threw it into the ravine. If I could go back to that moment, knowing what would come after, would I still do it?" Wang was silent for a moment, considering. "That is the question we all face when kindness costs us something. Do we regret the kindness, or do we regret that the world punished us for it?" "I don't know," May admitted. "I saved a man's life, and he repaid me by destroying my home. How do I make sense of that?" "You do not," Wang said simply. "Some things cannot be made sense of. They can only be endured and remembered. The lesson is not that you should not have saved him. The lesson is that the world is broken in ways we cannot fix alone." "Then what is the point of trying?" Wang smiled, sad but genuine. "The point is that we remain human even when the world tries to make us into something less. You saved a life because that is who you are. The fact that the man you saved chose to betray that gift, that tells us who he is, not who you are." May felt something ease slightly in her chest, though the pain remained. "Will we survive this, Elder Wang? Will we find somewhere to go, somewhere to live?" "We have survived before," Wang said. "We will survive again. It will not be easy. Many will be lost along the way. But some of us will endure, will build again, will continue. That is what we do. That is what we have always done." From the eastern ridge, May saw a figure moving, silhouetted against the stars. Cole Whitaker was still there, still watching. Did he sleep, she wondered? Or did guilt keep him awake as it kept her awake? The next morning dawned gray and heavy, clouds moving in from the west that promised rain but would probably deliver none. The desert was good at promising things it never provided. The pace of packing intensified. Wagons were loaded and overloaded, possessions stacked and restacked as families tried to maximize what they could carry. Arguments broke out over weight distribution, over which items were essential and which were not. The stress of forced displacement was fraying nerves and breaking bonds. May was helping load their own wagon, borrowed from the Lee family who had left the day before, when she heard shouting from the eastern edge of the village. She turned to see Patterson and 3 other riders entering the village proper, their horses walking slowly between the houses, their eyes assessing everything they saw. Chen immediately moved to intercept them, his body tense. "You have no business here yet. We have until sunset." Patterson smiled that cold smile. "Just checking on progress, making sure you people aren't hiding anything valuable, trying to take what doesn't belong to you." "Everything here belongs to us," Chen said firmly. "We built these structures. We dug the well. We cleared the land. You may be taking it from us, but do not insult us by claiming we are thieves." One of the other riders, a thin man with a scar across his cheek, spat into the dust. Uppity for someone being kicked out of his squat. "You people don't own nothing. Never did. This land belongs to whoever's strong enough to take it, and today that's the Whitakers. May saw her uncle's hands curl into fists, saw the rage building behind his carefully controlled expression. She moved quickly to his side, placing a hand on his arm. "Uncle, please," she said quietly. "They want you to fight. Do not give them the excuse." Patterson noticed her and his smile widened. "Well, if it isn't the famous rope thrower, the girl who saved young Cole's life. How's that working out for you, sweetheart?" The casual cruelty of the question, delivered with such amused contempt, made something snap inside May. Before she could think, before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. "You are proud of this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with emotion. "Driving out families, taking homes from children, forcing people into the desert with nothing? This is what makes you feel strong." Patterson's amusement faded, replaced by something darker. "Careful, girl. You're talking to someone who could make this whole process a lot more unpleasant for your people." "More unpleasant than stealing everything we have?" May shot back. "More unpleasant than destroying lives for profit? How much worse can you make it?" The scarred rider moved his horse closer, his hand dropping to his gun. "She's got a mouth that needs teaching some respect." Chen stepped between them immediately, his voice hard. "You touch her, and I will find a way to make you regret it. Consequences be damned." For a moment, violence hung in the air like heat shimmer. Then another voice cut through the tension. "Patterson, back off!" Cole Whitaker rode into the village, his black horse moving with controlled power. His face was harder than May had seen it, his eyes cold as they fixed on his own men. "I told you to observe from the perimeter, not to come in here antagonizing people," Cole said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "Get back to your positions, now!" Patterson's jaw tightened, but he pulled his horse around. "Just making sure the job gets done properly." "The job will get done," Cole replied. "But we do it the way I said. These people leave peacefully. We avoid unnecessary conflict. That was the agreement." The scarred rider sneered. "Your brother wouldn't be so gentle." "My brother isn't here," Cole said flatly. "I am. And while I'm in charge, you follow my orders or you answer to me. Your choice." After a long, tense moment, Patterson nodded and rode back toward the perimeter, the other riders following. But the look he gave Cole before he left was full of contempt and calculation. When they were gone, Cole turned to Chen. "I apologize for that. It won't happen again." "Your apologies mean nothing," Chen said coldly. "You can control your men, or you cannot. Either way, we will be gone by sunset, as ordered." Cole's eyes moved to May, and she saw something complicated there. Shame, regret, and something that might have been longing for circumstances to be different. "I meant what I said yesterday," he told her quietly. "I'm sorry for how this has turned out. If there was another way—" "There was another way," May interrupted. "You could have refused. You could have told your father this was wrong. You could have honored the debt you owed. But you chose your family's power over your own conscience. Do not apologize for choices you made freely." Cole flinched as if struck. "You think this was a free choice? You think I have the luxury of defying my father, of standing against my entire family? I'm the younger son. I have no inheritance, no independent wealth. Everything I have comes from the Whitaker name. If I refuse family business, I have nothing." "Then you have chosen money and comfort over honor," May said. "That is your right, but do not expect me to pity you for it." For a long moment, Cole simply sat on his horse, staring down at her. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the turquoise ring. He held it in his palm, the stone catching what little light penetrated the gray sky. "My mother gave me this ring when I turned 18, he said quietly. "She told me it was supposed to remind me to be brave, to do what was right, even when it was hard. I gave it to you because saving me took real courage, the kind I'm not sure I have." He closed his fist around the ring. "When this is over, when you're gone from here, I'll keep this. And every time I look at it, I'll remember the woman who had more courage in throwing a rope than I have in living my entire life." He turned his horse and rode back toward the ridge without waiting for a response. May watched him go, feeling nothing but emptiness. His words were pretty, his regret perhaps even genuine. But words and regret changed nothing. By sunset, her home would be gone. The final hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. The remaining families worked desperately to finish packing, to salvage the last precious items, to prepare themselves for the journey ahead. Elder Wong made his final rounds, helping where he could,
offering blessings and encouragement. At 73, the journey would be hardest on him, but he never complained, never showed fear. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the last wagon was loaded. The final families gathered their children, their belongings, their courage. May stood in what had been her home and looked around one last time. The empty rooms echoed with memories, her mother cooking at the small stove, her father laughing at some joke, her aunt singing while she worked. All of that was gone now, reduced to ghosts and echoes. She picked up the small pack that contained everything she would carry into whatever came next. Some clothes, a little food, the jade carving from her father, her grandmother's red thread. The physical weight was light. The emotional weight was crushing. Outside, Chen had finished hitching the mule to their wagon. Lynn sat already on the seat, her face composed but her eyes red from crying. The ceramic bowl was wrapped and safe among their possessions. "It is time," Chen said quietly. Mi climbed onto the wagon, settling beside her aunt. Around them, the other remaining families were doing the same, forming a small caravan of the displaced. Elder Wang stood in the center of the village one last time, his arms raised. "We leave this place with dignity," he called out, his voice strong despite his age. "We leave with our heads high and our spirits unbroken. They can take our homes, but they cannot take who we are. Remember that. Always remember that." The caravan began to move, wheels creaking, mules and horses plodding forward. As they passed through the village for the last time, May looked at each structure, each familiar landmark. The well they had dug together, the community building where they had celebrated festivals and births and marriages, the small garden plots where they had coaxed vegetables from unwilling soil. All of it would be gone soon, burned or dismantled, erased as if their 3 years of effort and hope had never existed. The line of mounted riders parted to let them through, watching in silence. May searched for Cole among them and found him still on the eastern ridge, a dark figure against the darkening sky. As their wagon passed the ridge, she allowed herself one final look. Cole was staring directly at her, and even at this distance she could see the tension in his posture, the weight he carried. She hoped it was heavy. She hoped the turquoise ring felt like an anchor around his neck. She hoped that every time he looked at it, he felt the full weight of what he had done, the price of his family loyalty, the cost of choosing power over honor. The caravan moved slowly west, away from the village, away from the only home many of them had known since coming to this harsh territory. The sun continued its descent, painting the desert in shades of red and gold, beautiful and utterly indifferent to human suffering. Behind them, as the last light faded from the sky, May saw smoke beginning to rise. The Whitakers were not waiting until morning. They were burning the village now, erasing all evidence that anyone had ever lived there. 3 years of life, gone in flames. Lynn saw it too and made a small sound of grief. Chen reached over and took her hand, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. May turned her face forward, refusing to watch her home burn. What was done was done. Looking back would change nothing. But as the darkness deepened and the stars began to emerge, she made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would endure. She would carry the lesson of this betrayal forward into whatever life came next. Mercy had cost her everything, but she would not let it cost her herself. The world was cruel and unjust, ruled by power and profit rather than compassion or fairness. That was the truth the desert had taught her. But she would not become cruel in response. She would not let the world's brutality remake her into something unrecognizable. She would survive with her humanity intact, even if it meant carrying the scars of that choice for the rest of her life. The caravan moved through the darkness, a small line of displaced souls carrying what they could into an uncertain future. Behind them, the flames climbed higher, consuming the past. Ahead lay only the desert, vast and unforgiving, and the faint hope that somewhere in all that emptiness there might be room for them to begin again. The desert night swallowed them whole. The caravan moved slowly through darkness, broken only by the dim light of lanterns hanging from the lead wagon, casting dancing shadows across the rocky ground. The temperature had dropped sharply, as it always did after sunset, and May pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. Behind them, the orange glow of the burning village painted the horizon, a funeral pyre for 3 years of hope. May forced herself not to look back again. Elder Wang had said they would leave with dignity,
and she would honor that even if her heart felt like it was being torn apart with every mile they traveled. The mule pulling their wagon plodded forward with patient determination, its hooves finding purchase on the uneven ground. Chen held the reins loosely, his face barely visible in the darkness, but his tension evident in the set of his shoulders. Lin sat between them, silent, her hands folded in her lap with a stillness that spoke of grief held tightly in check. Around them, the sounds of the other wagons created a rhythm of displacement, wheels creaking, leather harnesses straining, the occasional murmur of voices trying to comfort frightened children. Young Wei rode in the wagon behind them with his parents, and Mei could hear his mother singing softly, some old song from a homeland none of them would ever see again. They traveled for 3 hours before Elder Wang called a halt. The old man rode up and down the line of wagons, his voice carrying through the darkness. "We rest here until dawn. Water your animals. Give the children something to eat. Try to sleep if you can. We have many miles ahead tomorrow." The families gathered in a loose circle, building small fires that pushed back the darkness but did little to warm the cold that seemed to come from within as much as from the night air. Mei helped Chen unhitch the mule and give it water from their precious store. The animal drank deeply, and Mei found herself envying its simple ability to focus on immediate needs rather than dwelling on loss. Lin distributed rice balls she had prepared before they left, wrapped in cloth and still faintly warm. The food was bland but filling, and Mei ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Elder Wang moved from fire to fire, checking on families, offering words of encouragement. When he reached their fire, he lowered himself slowly to sit beside Mei, his old bones protesting the movement. "How are you managing?" he asked quietly. "I am here," Mei said. "I am breathing. That is all I can manage right now." Wang nodded as if this was a perfectly acceptable answer. "That is enough for tonight. Tomorrow we can manage more." "Where exactly are we going?" Mei asked. "You said Carson Valley, but do we know anyone there? Will they welcome 30 displaced people arriving with nothing?" Wang's face was thoughtful in the firelight. "I have a contact there, a man named Li Huang, who runs a trading post. He came through our village once, 2 years ago, and we treated him well. He may remember that kindness. At the very least, he may give us information about where we can go, what opportunities exist. And if he turns us away? Then we continue west," Wang said simply. "We keep moving until we find a place that will have us. The world is large, Mei. Somewhere in it there is room for us." Mei wanted to believe him, but the night felt endless, and the desert felt like it stretched to infinity in every direction. The idea of finding safety, of finding home, seemed like a fantasy told to comfort children. She lay down near the fire, using her pack as a pillow, and stared up at the stars. They were the same stars that had hung over the village, over the ravine where she had saved Cole Whitaker, over every moment of her life. Constant and indifferent, beautiful and cold. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sounds of crying children and worried voices, by the cold that seeped through her thin blanket, by memories of her mother's face and her father's laugh, and the home that no longer existed. Dawn came slowly, the sky lightening from black to gray to pale blue. The caravan stirred, families rousing themselves for another day of travel. Mei's body ached from sleeping on hard ground, and her bandaged hands throbbed with renewed pain. They ate a cold breakfast of dried fruit and hard biscuits, then began the process of hitching animals and preparing to move again. The routine was familiar now, even after just one night. Pack, load, check supplies, move forward. The second day of travel was harder than the first. The desert sun beat down without mercy, and the rocky terrain made for slow going. One of the wagons lost a wheel around midday, requiring an hour's stop while the men worked to repair it using spare parts and improvised solutions. Mei walked alongside the wagon for much of the afternoon, partly to spare the mule her weight, partly because sitting still made her think too much. Her feet raised small clouds of dust with each step, and she watched them settle, thinking about how quickly traces disappeared in this landscape. In a few hours, the wind would erase all evidence of their passing. The desert knew how to make things vanish. It was young Wei who first spotted the riders. "Look," he called out, pointing to the eastern horizon. "Someone's coming!" The caravan came to an immediate halt, families tensing with fear. Mei's heart began to pound as she counted the approaching figures. 4 riders, moving fast, closing the distance rapidly. "Are they following us?" Lin asked,
her voice tight with anxiety. Did the Whitakers send them to... But as the riders drew closer, May saw that the lead horse was black, and the rider who sat astride it was unmistakable. Cole Whitaker. He rode alone ahead of the other three, his face grim with determination. When he reached the caravan, he pulled his horse to a stop about 20 feet away, as if understanding that coming closer would be seen as a threat. Chen immediately moved to position himself between Cole and the wagons, his hand gripping a hammer from their supplies. Other men did the same, creating a protective line. "You have no business here," Chen called out. "We left as ordered. We are beyond your father's land now. Leave us alone." Cole raised one hand in a gesture meant to be peaceable. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to speak with May, just for a moment." "You have said enough to her," Chen replied coldly. "More than enough. Ride back to your stolen land and leave us in peace." But May stepped forward, moving past her uncle before he could stop her. Something in Cole's expression made her curious despite her anger, despite everything. He looked different than he had the day before, less composed, more desperate. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat. Cole dismounted and walked toward her slowly, stopping when he was close enough to speak without shouting but far enough to avoid seeming threatening. The three riders who had come with him remained mounted, watching the exchange with varied expressions. Two looked uncomfortable. The third was Patterson, and he looked furious. "This is a mistake, Cole," Patterson called out. "Your father's going to hear about this." "Then let him hear," Cole shot back without taking his eyes off May. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. "I came to give you this." He held out the pouch, and May made no move to take it. "What is it?" she asked. "Money," Cole said. $500. It's not nearly enough for what my family took from you, but it's what I could gather without raising questions. Take it. Use it to start over wherever you end up." May stared at the pouch as if it were a snake. "You think money makes this right? You think you can buy your way out of what you did?" "No," Cole said quietly. "I know I can't make this right, but I can try to help you survive what comes next. Please, take it." "We don't want your guilt money," Chen said, moving to stand beside May. "Keep your coins. They change nothing." But Elder Wong had approached as well, and he looked at the pouch with the practical eyes of someone who understood that pride was a luxury they could not afford. "How much did you say?" Wong asked. $500, Cole repeated. Wong's expression remained neutral, but May saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. $500 could buy supplies, could pay for passage somewhere, could mean the difference between survival and starvation for 30 people traveling through harsh territory. "This money," Wong said carefully, "where did it come from? Is it stolen from your family? Will taking it bring trouble down on us?" Cole shook his head. "It's mine. Earnings from work I did before all this, money I had saved. Taking it won't bring any trouble on you, I promise."
The promise of a man who drove us from our homes," Chen said bitterly. "Forgive us if we find little comfort in your word." Cole's face tightened with pain, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned his full attention to May. "I know what you think of me," he said quietly. "I know what I showed you about who I am. You were right when you said I chose my family's power over my own conscience. But I'm trying, badly, inadequately, to do something now that might matter. Will you let me?" May looked at the leather pouch, at the money that represented some fraction of what had been stolen from them, a token payment for displacement and suffering. Part of her wanted to throw it back in his face, to reject anything that came from him. But another part, the practical part that her parents had taught her, the part that understood survival sometimes required swallowing pride, saw the truth. This money could help. Whatever his motives, whatever his guilt, $500 could make a real difference. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "The truth, not pretty words about making things right. What do you actually want from this?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "I want to be able to look at myself in a mirror. I want to believe that even though I failed the real test, I can still do something good with what power I have. And," he paused, seeming to struggle with the next words, "I want you to know that what you did, pulling me from that mud, it mattered. You showed me what real courage looks like, what integrity means. I'm ashamed that I couldn't live up to that example. but maybe I can at least not make things worse than I already have. Patterson rode closer, his face dark with anger. This is insanity. Your brother is going to hear about this, and when he does, I'll deal with it, Cole interrupted sharply. You can report whatever you want to Marcus. Tell him I'm weak. Tell him I'm compromised. Tell him I'm not fit for family business. All of it is probably true. But right now, in this moment, I'm still in charge of this detail, and you'll wait while I finish what I came to do. He turned back to May and held out the pouch again. Please, take it. Let me do this one thing right. May looked at Elder Wong, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Then she looked at her aunt and uncle. Lin's face was conflicted, but Chen's expression had softened slightly, pragmatism winning over anger. Finally, May reached out and took the pouch. It was heavy, the weight of real currency, of possibility. This does not make us even, she said clearly. This does not erase what you did, or what your family did. We are not friends. We are not grateful. We are simply practical enough to accept help when we need it. I understand, Cole said, and there was relief in his voice despite her harsh words. May opened the pouch and looked inside. She had never seen so much money in one place, gold coins and paper bills, more wealth than her family had possessed in years. Elder Wong moved closer and examined the contents himself. This is genuine, he confirmed, and it is, as he said, $500. 520, Cole corrected. I rounded up. Seemed like the least I could do. There was bitter irony in the moment, the man who had destroyed their homes now playing the role of benefactor. But May was done trying to make sense of Cole Whitaker's contradictions. He was what he was, weak and privileged, capable of cruelty through inaction, but also capable of this small attempt at redemption. There's something else, Cole said, and he pulled a folded paper from his jacket. This is a letter of passage signed by my father. It's essentially a safe conduct through Whitaker territory. If you run into any of our people or anyone who respects the Whitaker name, this should keep you from being harassed or turned away from water sources. He held out the letter, and this time Elder Wong took it directly. Your father knows you're doing this? Wong asked skeptically. No, Cole admitted. I forged his signature. But it will hold up unless someone checks directly with him, and by the time that happens, you'll be long gone from this region. Patterson made a sound of disgust. You're committing fraud for these people, forging your father's name. Do you have any idea what he'll do when he finds out? I have some idea, Cole said quietly, but that's my problem, not theirs. May studied his face, trying to understand what was happening. This was not the same man who had led 100 riders to destroy their village. Or perhaps it was the same man, but one who was finally being torn apart by the contradiction between who he was expected to be and who he wanted to be. Why now? She asked. Why this change? Yesterday you watched our homes burn. Today you bring money and forged papers. What happened between then and now? Cole's expression showed pain that went bone deep. I couldn't sleep last night. Kept seeing your face when you threw that ring at me. Kept thinking about my mother, about what she would say if she knew what I'd done. She gave me that ring to remind me to be brave, to do what's right, and I used it as a token of gratitude to a woman whose life I then destroyed. The irony started to feel less like irony and more like prophecy. He pulled the turquoise ring from his pocket and looked at it. I don't deserve to keep this, but I will. I'll keep it as a reminder of who I became when it mattered and who I failed to be. Maybe that will mean something eventually. Or maybe it will just be a pretty stone that you occasionally feel bad about, May said. Self-awareness is not the same as change. You're right, Cole agreed. But it's a start. It's more than I had yesterday. One of the other riders who had come with Cole, a younger man with kind eyes, spoke up for the first time. We should go, Cole. The longer we're here, the more likely someone reports back. Cole nodded and moved back toward his horse. But before he mounted, he turned to face the entire caravan. I know what my family did to you was wrong, he called out, his voice carrying to all the gathered families. I know that I participated in that wrong, that I led the men who drove you out. I can't undo it, and I can't make it right. But I want you to know that not everyone in this territory thinks what happened to you was justice. Some of us know it was theft dressed up in legal language. Some of us are ashamed. Shame is cheap, someone called from one of the wagons. Justice is what we needed. All you're offering is guilt and pocket change. You're right, Cole said simply.
I'm offering inadequate compensation for enormous harm. But it's what I have the power to give. Take it or don't, but know that it comes with genuine remorse." He swung into his saddle, the movement practiced and smooth. Patterson and the other 2 riders fell in beside him, but Patterson's face was twisted with contempt. "This is going to cost you everything," Patterson said to Cole. "Your father will disown you. Marcus will take over all your responsibilities. You'll be cut off from the family entirely." "Maybe," Cole replied. "Or maybe I'll finally become someone worth being. Either way, I can live with it better than living with doing nothing." He looked at May one last time. "I hope you find somewhere good, somewhere better than what we took from you. And I hope someday, a long time from now, you might think of me as slightly less contemptible than I deserve." "I will think of you," May said quietly, "as a lesson about what happens when power matters more than principle, when family loyalty trumps human decency." "You are not a villain, Cole Whitaker. You are something worse. You are someone who knew better and chose wrong anyway. That is a lesson worth remembering." The words landed like physical blows, and Cole absorbed them without flinching. Then he nodded once and turned his horse west. "Wait!" May called impulsively. Cole stopped and looked back. "Thank you," May said, and the words felt strange in her mouth. "For the money and the letter. It will help us survive. Whatever your reasons, whatever your guilt, it will make a difference." Cole's expression showed something like gratitude, though it was mixed with too much pain to be pure. "That's more than I deserve to hear. Thank you for saying it anyway." And then he rode away, the 3 riders following, becoming dark shapes against the bright desert sky, before disappearing entirely behind a ridge of broken rock. The caravan stood in silence for a long moment after the riders vanished. Then Chen let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "that was unexpected." Elder Wong examined the letter Cole had given them, his old eyes scanning the forged signature. "This may prove useful. The Whitaker name carries weight through much of this territory. Having this could ease our passage considerably." "He's going to pay for this," Lin said quietly. "When his family discovers what he's done, they'll punish him severely." "That is his choice to bear," Wong replied. "We did not ask him to come. We did not ask him to help. If there are consequences for his actions, they are his to endure." May tucked the leather pouch into her pack, feeling the weight of it settle against the other small treasures she carried. $520. It wouldn't rebuild what they'd lost, wouldn't restore their homes or erase the trauma of displacement, but it would buy time, buy supplies, buy possibilities. "We should keep moving," Wong said. "We've lost time with this encounter, and we have many miles yet before we reach Carson Valley." The caravan resumed its westward journey, the wagons creaking back into motion, the animals plodding forward with patient determination. May walked alongside their wagon again, her mind churning through what had just happened. Cole Whitaker had come. He had brought money and a forged letter. He had exposed himself to consequences from his family, and he had done it not because it would fix anything, but because he couldn't live with himself otherwise. It was a small redemption for a large wrong, inadequate by any measure. And yet May found herself thinking about her mother's words, spoken years ago when May had been angry about some injustice in the railroad camps. "People are complicated," her mother had said. "They can be cruel and kind, weak and brave, sometimes in the same breath. We judge them by their actions, yes, but we understand them by their contradictions." Cole was a contradiction. A man who had betrayed his conscience but couldn't quite live with that betrayal, who had chosen family over honor but then tried to honor his debt in secret, who was too weak to resist his father but strong enough to risk his father's wrath for a small act of restitution. It didn't make him a hero. It didn't make what he'd done acceptable. But it made him human in a way that May could almost understand, even if she couldn't forgive. They traveled for 4 more days before reaching Carson Valley. The journey was hard, marked by exhaustion and dwindling supplies. But the money Cole had given them allowed Elder Wong to trade at a small outpost they passed, restocking their food and water, buying grain for the animals. The letter proved useful twice. Once, when they encountered a group of suspicious ranch hands who initially seemed inclined to turn them away from a stream, and again when they sought permission to camp on land that turned out to be owned by a Whitaker business associate. In both cases, the forged signature opened doors that would have otherwise been closed. Carson Valley, when they finally reached it, was larger than their lost village, but still small by any standard. A cluster of buildings built around a crossroads, serving the scattered ranches and mining operations in the region. The trading post run by Li Huang was easy to find, a sturdy structure with Chinese characters painted beside English lettering. Li Huang himself was a round man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a careful manner. He recognized Elder Wang immediately. "I remember you," Huang said, his Cantonese carrying the accent of Guangdong province. "You gave me shelter 2 years ago when I was traveling, fed me, and asked nothing in return." "We fed a traveler," Wang replied. "It was simple courtesy." "Simple courtesy is rare enough to be remembered," Huang said. He looked at the tired, dusty caravan of displaced families. "What has happened to bring you here?" Wang explained the situation, the Whitaker land claim, the forced evacuation, the burning of their village. As he spoke, Huang's expression grew darker. "This is happening more and more," Huang said when Wang finished. "The territorial government is consolidating power, giving preference to large landholders. Small settlements, especially Chinese ones, are being erased from the map." "Can you help us?" Wang asked plainly. "We need a place to stay while we figure out our next steps. We have some money. We can pay for supplies." Wang was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he nodded slowly. "Behind my trading post, there's a large, empty lot. Used to be a stable before it burned down 3 years ago. You can camp there while you make your plans. No charge for the space. I'll sell you supplies at cost." The relief that swept through the group was palpable. A place to rest, even temporarily, a chance to recover before deciding what came next. Over the following weeks, the displaced families began to scatter, each making their own choices about the future. Some headed west to California, hoping to find work in cities or join other Chinese communities there. Others went north toward mining camps, willing to take dangerous work for the promise of wages. A few found opportunities in Carson Valley itself, hiring on as laborers for local ranchers or businesses. Chen found work helping Li Huang expand his trading post, his skills with carpentry proving valuable. Lin took in sewing and mending, her careful needlework earning respect and a modest income. Slowly, they began to rebuild a life from the ashes of what had been taken. May worked alongside them, helping in the trading post, learning the business of commerce, discovering she had an aptitude for numbers and negotiation. She saved her earnings carefully, adding to what remained of Cole's money. Elder Wang settled into an advisory role in the small Chinese community that existed in Carson Valley, his wisdom and experience making him a natural leader. He held court at the trading post most evenings, offering counsel and settling minor disputes. Young Wei and his family decided to head to California after 2 months, hoping to join relatives in San Francisco. The day they left, Wei came to say goodbye to May. "I'm sorry I blamed you," he said quietly, "for saving that man, for bringing trouble to us. It wasn't your fault." "It was nobody's fault," May replied, "and everybody's fault. The world is complicated." 6 months after their arrival in Carson Valley, a traveling merchant brought news from Iron Ridge. The Whitaker family had experienced internal troubles. The youngest son, Cole, had been disowned by his father for what was described as unforgivable insubordination and betrayal of family interests. He had left the territory entirely, heading east, and no one knew where he'd gone. The merchant told the story with relish, enjoying the gossip of powerful families brought low by internal conflict. But May listened with mixed feelings. She imagined Cole somewhere far from here, carrying the turquoise ring as a reminder of who he'd been when it mattered. She hoped it weighed on him. She hoped he learned from it. She hoped he became someone different than the man who had led 100 riders to destroy innocent lives. But mostly, she found she didn't think about him much at all. He had been a moment in her life, significant, painful, instructive, but ultimately just a moment. Her life was larger than that moment, richer than that betrayal. One evening, about 8 months after their arrival, May sat outside the trading post watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of amber and rose. Lin came and sat beside her, moving with the careful stiffness of someone whose body had been worked hard. "Are you happy here?" Lin asked. May considered the question. "Happy feels like the wrong word. But I'm alive. I am useful. I have purpose. That feels like enough." "Your mother would be proud of you," Lin said. "The way you've adapted, the way you've helped us survive and rebuild." "Mother taught me that survival is not about strength,
May replied. It's about flexibility.
About bending without breaking, about finding water in dry places. She also taught you about kindness, Lynn added, about helping those in need, even at cost to yourself. May thought about the rope, the ravine, the mud-covered stranger. Do you think I was wrong to save him? Lynn was quiet for a long moment. I think you were who you are, and the world punished you for it. But I also think the money he brought helped us survive those first difficult months. So maybe there are no simple answers to whether kindness is worth its cost. That's not very comforting, May said. No, Lynn agreed, but it's honest. Elder Wong joined them, lowering himself carefully to sit on the other side of May. I've been thinking about our village, he said, about what we lost and what we learned. And what did we learn? May asked. That home is not a place, Wong said. It's people. It's the connections we maintain, the culture we carry, the stories we tell. The Whitakers burned our buildings, but they couldn't burn what matters. We carried that with us, and we're rebuilding it here. Is that supposed to make me feel better about what they took? May asked. No, Wong said gently. It's supposed to help you understand what they couldn't take. There's a difference. A year after their displacement, May stood in the trading post counting inventory when a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It took her a moment to recognize him. Thinner, more weathered, dressed in simple traveler's clothes rather than expensive ranch wear, Cole Whitaker. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes widening with recognition and something that looked like fear. May, he said quietly. I didn't know you'd settled here. If I had, I would have... Would have what? May asked, her voice neutral. Gone somewhere else? Avoided the reminder of what you did? Cole flinched. Something like that, yes. Li Huang emerged from the back room, saw Cole, and his expression went cold. We don't serve Whitakers here. Find your supplies elsewhere. But May raised a hand. It's all right, Uncle Huang. I'll handle this. She came out from behind the counter and stood facing Cole. He looked different than she remembered, the arrogance gone, replaced by something humbler and more worn. His hands were calloused in ways they hadn't been before, suggesting he'd been doing physical labor. The expensive watch chain was gone. What are you doing here? May asked. Looking for work, Cole said. I heard there might be mining opportunities in the hills east of here. I'm working my way north, taking jobs where I can find them. Your family cut you off, May said. It wasn't a question. Completely, Cole confirmed. My father disowned me. Marcus took over everything I used to handle. They made it clear I was no longer welcome in Whitaker business or Whitaker properties. So I left. Because you gave us money, May said. Because I gave you money, because I forged my father's signature, because I showed what he called weakness for people who didn't matter. His words, not mine. May studied him, looking for the man who had led 100 riders, trying to reconcile that person with this tired traveler standing in a trading post asking for work. Do you regret it? She asked. Helping us? Losing everything because of it? Cole thought about the question seriously before answering. I regret a lot of things. I regret not having the courage to refuse in the first place. I regret letting my family destroy your village. I regret that it took losing everything to finally become someone I can look at in a mirror. But giving you that money? Trying to help even inadequately? No, I don't regret that. It's the only thing from that whole terrible time that I don't regret. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the turquoise ring. I still carry this. Still look at it every day. Still remember what it's supposed to represent. And what does it represent? May asked. The person I should have been from the beginning, Cole said simply. The courage to do what's right even when it's hard. The integrity to honor debts and keep promises. All the things I failed at when it mattered most. May felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that Cole had paid a real price for his attempt at redemption, that he had walked away from power and privilege to become someone who could live with himself. There's a ranch 15 miles north, she said, run by a man named Samuel Chen, no relation to my uncle. He's been looking for hands to help with spring work. Pay is fair, food is decent. Tell him May from the trading post sent you. Cole's expression showed surprise and gratitude. Why are you helping me? Because you helped us when you didn't have to, May said. Because you paid a price for that choice. Because revenge and bitterness don't interest me as much as they probably should.
She paused. And because my mother taught me to help people in need, even at cost to myself. I'm still learning whether that's wisdom or foolishness, but it's who I am. Cole nodded slowly, understanding perhaps more than she'd said. Thank you. For what it's worth? I'm sorry for all of it. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need to say it anyway. It doesn't change the past, May agreed, but maybe it changes the future. Maybe you'll be better than you were. Maybe that matters. Cole left the trading post with directions to Samuel Chen's ranch, and May watched him go, feeling strange and complicated emotions she couldn't quite name. Elder Wong appeared beside her. You helped him. I did. Why? May thought about the question. Because carrying hate is exhausting. Because he lost everything trying to make partial amends. Because the world has enough cruelty without me adding to it. Choose whichever reason feels right. All of them feel right, Wong said. That's the problem with wisdom. It contains contradictions. Over the following years, May heard occasional news of Cole Whitaker. He worked on Chen's ranch for 2 seasons, earning a reputation as a hard worker who kept to himself. Then he moved on, taking other jobs, slowly building a new life from nothing. Once, about 3 years after that encounter in the trading post, a letter arrived for May. It was from Cole, written in careful script on cheap paper. The letter was brief. He had found work as a foreman on a ranch owned by a widow who treated her workers fairly. He had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land. He was building a house. He was trying to live a life that his mother would have been proud of, that the woman who had pulled him from the mud might not entirely despise. He didn't ask for forgiveness or absolution. He simply wanted her to know that her kindness, both in saving his life and in directing him to work when he had nothing, had made a difference. That he was trying to become worthy of both gifts. Me read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it in the small wooden box where she kept her few treasures. Her father's jade carving, her grandmother's red thread, the ceramic bowl that had belonged to Lynn's grandmother. She didn't write back. Some stories didn't need continued correspondence. They simply existed, complete in themselves, lessons written in pain and survival and the complicated mathematics of mercy. 10 years after the destruction of their village, May stood in a much larger trading post, the expansion she and Li Huang had built together, reflecting the growth of the Chinese community in Carson Valley. She was 33 years old, unmarried by choice, respected as a shrewd businesswoman and fair dealer. Chen and Lin still lived in Carson Valley, their small house now surrounded by a flourishing garden. Elder Wong had passed away peacefully in his sleep at 81, surrounded by the community he had helped rebuild. Young Wei had written from San Francisco, where he worked as a translator and had married a girl from his village in China. The displaced families had scattered across the West, but they maintained connections, sharing news and stories, creating a network of memory that kept their lost village alive in ways that physical structures never could. On the anniversary of the day they'd been forced to leave, May always closed the trading post early and walked out into the desert, finding a quiet place to sit and watch the sunset. She thought about her parents, about the village that no longer existed except in memory, about the choices that had led her to this moment. She thought about the rope she had thrown into a ravine, the act of mercy that had cost her everything and taught her lessons she was still unpacking years later. She thought about Cole Whitaker, who had been too weak to refuse his family, but strong enough to risk their punishment for a small act of restitution, who had lost everything and was slowly, painfully, building himself into someone better. And she thought about the truth the desert had taught her, that survival required both flexibility and strength, that mercy was dangerous but necessary, that the world was cruel but could also contain moments of unexpected grace, that home was not a place but a constellation of connections and stories and stubborn refusal to let cruelty destroy what made you human. The turquoise ring that Cole still carried, the letter he had sent, the village that existed now only in memory, the families scattered across the West who still shared stories around their fires. All of it was part of the same lesson, written in fire and displacement and the complicated aftermath of a single choice to throw a rope to a drowning stranger. May had saved a life, and it had cost her everything. But she had survived with her humanity intact, had rebuilt from ashes, had created something new and resilient and worth protecting. The desert stretched around her as the sun touched the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. The same desert that had witnessed her loss, her displacement, her stubborn refusal to be broken by either. Somewhere in all that vastness, Cole Whitaker was probably watching the same sunset, carrying the same memories, learning the same hard lessons about what it meant to be human in a world that often rewarded cruelty over kindness. The story that had begun in a ravine with mud and desperation had unfolded into something larger and more complicated than either of them could have imagined. A tale of mercy and betrayal, of displacement and survival, of the price of kindness and the cost of conscience. It was not a story with a happy ending, because that would be dishonest. But it was a story of endurance, of resilience, of the refusal to let the world's brutality remake you into something unrecognizable. And in the harsh territory of the Nevada frontier, where survival was never guaranteed and justice was a rare luxury, that was its own kind of victory. Me stood and walked back toward the lights of Carson Valley, toward the life she had built from the ruins of what had been taken, carrying the weight of memory and the hard-won wisdom that some choices defined you even when they destroyed you, that mercy was worth its cost even when the world punished you for it, that survival meant carrying forward not just your body but your humanity, intact and uncompromised despite everything. The desert night fell around her, vast and indifferent, beautiful and brutal, and she walked through it unbroken, still herself, still standing. That, in the end, was the lesson written in dust and fire and the turquoise ring that traveled east in the pocket of a man learning to live with the consequences of his choices. Mercy had been dangerous, but it had also been essential. And May would carry that truth forward into whatever came next, a testament to the stubborn belief that kindness mattered even in a cruel world, that honor had value even when it cost everything, that some debts could never be repaid but still demanded acknowledgement. The story of the woman who saved a stranger and lost her home became legend in the scattered Chinese communities of the West, a cautionary tale about the dangers of crossing boundaries, but also a reminder that courage came in many forms, that survival meant more than just staying alive, that the measure of a person was found not in their power, but in their choices when power was absent. And sometimes, late at night when the wind whispered across the desert, travelers claimed they could still see the ghost of a small village that once stood in a forgotten valley, its structures long gone, but its spirit enduring in the stories told beside campfires, and in the quiet conversations of displaced people who had learned that home was something you carried inside rather than something that could be burned or stolen or erased. That was the final lesson, that what the Whitakers had taken was temporal, but what May and her community had preserved was eternal. Written not in wood and stone, but in memory and resilience and the unbreakable truth that humanity endured not despite cruelty, but in defiance of it. The desert remembered everything, and some stories, once written in its dust, became permanent fixtures of the landscape, even when all physical evidence had vanished. This was one of those stories, and it would be told as long as anyone remained who understood that mercy, despite its terrible cost, was always worth choosing. Always.